What is going on, Chess YouTube? So in today's video, we're having a look at a truly crazy game that Magnus Carlsen just played today on January 21st, 2025 on the chess.com servers. And yes, in this game, Magnus sacrifices the rook. This game is Santo Blue versus Magnus Carlsen from the chess.com servers on January 21st, 2025. All right, in the game, Santo Blue opens 1e4 and Magnus goes 1c5, the Sicilian defense. Now, I actually don't know who Santo Blue is. If you do, drop a comment down below. I would love to know his real name. All I know is this guy is very, very strong. He's playing against Magnus, and he's rated over 3,000 online on chess.com, so he is no pushover by any means. All right, now Santo Blue goes knight f3, then d6, then d4, the open Sicilian. Then we have c takes, knight f6, pressuring e4, knight c3 does defend. And here Black's main options are e6, knight c6, g6, and the move played in the game, that is a6. Yes, that's right, folks. In this game, Magnus is heading for the dreaded Najdorf Sicilian, one of the strongest and sharpest responses to 1e4 for Black. Now here, of course, White has a million different options real fast. The main lines for White include bishop g5, bishop b3, f3, f4, g3, h3, h4, rook g1, bishop b2, bishop d3, bishop c4, knight b3, knight d, e2, a3, a4, and don't forget queen d3 and queen to f3. In this game, though, bishop g5 was chosen by Santo Blue, the old main line for White. Bishop g5, putting pressure on that knight on f6 and setting up a very fast long castles for White. All right, now, Magnus, how does he want to respond? The main line is e6, but instead, in this game, he actually goes knight b d7. And this move is very trendy at the highest level. A lot of Black players do play in this spirit. And what is the advantage of knight b d7 before e6? Well, with the knight supporting the other knight, you can delay e6 and go, for example, queen c7, b5, bishop b7, and so on, developing on the queen side very, very fast. All right, now here, White has a few options. f4 is the old main line, but instead he plays a move that was popularized by the Indian grandmaster Neji. I don't know his first name, but his last name was Neji. That is the move queen d2. Now, Neji at one point wrote a book for the company Quality Chess, where he covered the line bishop g5 against the Najdorf, and he did recommend this move queen d2, and it is very, very dangerous. White has a lot of different ideas with this move. All right, now here, Black starts h6, driving back that bishop. Now, if you take on f6, you give up that bishop pair for free. Therefore, bishop h4 chosen in the game, and here the main line starts with the move g6, intending the fianchetto of that dark squared bishop. Those lines are completely insane. The main line continues f4, then e5, then White usually castles at some point. It's very, very crazy, but instead in the game, Magnus goes for a slightly dubious idea. That is the move b5, immediately expanding on the queen side. Now here, White castles long castles. Black goes bishop b7, very standard stuff. And here, it is very important for White to play ultra aggressive. You either have to go f4 immediately, threatening e5, or bishop takes f6 and then f4. Either way, the f4 advance must come very, very fast. Now here, in this game, Santo Blue, I don't know his real name, Santo Blue, he makes a mistake and he goes a3. I guess he was concerned about the b4 advance from Black. b4 technically was being threatened, but overall, the knight could jump to d5 immediately. That would be a very fine advance for the knight. Therefore, a3 is not really necessary just yet, and it does represent mostly a wasted tempo. Now here, Magnus, he continues, rook c8, developing the rook to the c file, and potentially threatening rook takes c3 immediately. The point being, after rook takes c3, then b takes, then the knight jumps in on e4. You win a pawn and the knight and damage White's pawn structure on the queen side for that rook. That would be a very good sacrifice of the rook. Therefore here, Santo Blue, he plays yet another mistake. He goes f3. Now, this move f3 is designed to play against the move rook takes c3. The point being e4 is now defended, but it turns out Black can actually go rook takes c3 anyway here. Instead of f3, the right move was knight d5, jumping up with the knight and getting the knight off that c3 square, therefore stopping rook takes c3 ideas once and for all. Excuse me here. All right. Instead, f3 chosen in the game, bolstering e4, but here, of course, Magnus can just go rook takes c3 immediately. That would be the strongest continuation. The point being, rook takes, b takes, Then you go e5, driving back that knight, and you have an excellent game as black, maybe even intending a very fast d5 break, opening up the center, and white's king on the queen side would be permanently weak. Now, instead here, Magnus does go e6, intending perhaps bishop b7, a very solid idea, but again, it's a weak move because you missed the chance to go rook takes c3. All right, now here, Santo Blue, he does not miss this opportunity to go bishop e1, a very curious move, retreating the bishop back to e1. It went g5, then h4, then e1, and the point of bishop e1, it does support the c3 knight. Therefore, if black takes on c3, you recapture with the bishop, and you are doing just fine. All right, now here, Magnus. The strongest move here, it turns out, believe it or not, is g6, intending bishop g7. The point being, it is very, very hard and very time-consuming for white to set up that very important battery with the queen and the bishop on this diagonal. Therefore, for example, I don't know, bishop d2, bishop b3, queen d2, that would be 3 whole moves to take advantage of this diagonal. Therefore, the bishop is very, very safe on g7. Instead, bishop e7 chosen in the game by the GOAT, and now white has the chance to go g4, immediately punishing this move, but instead h4 chosen in the game, and this move also is very, very weak for white. The problem with this move, black can just go h5, stopping the alpha 0 h-pawn in its tracks right away. That was chosen in the game, and now black is doing relatively fine. All right, here, Santo Blue, he goes king to b1, sliding his king over, and here in this position, Magnus, the simplest move for black is just queen b6, intending ideas like b4 or a5, then b4. And again, black's going to have excellent counterplay on the queen side. Now, instead, in the game, he actually castles short. Short castles was the move, and this turns out to be a critical strategic mistake. I mean, after a move like this, you can tell Magnus just does not play the Najdorf very often as black. The problem with this move, you are castling into the attack, and instead, you simply have to leave your king on e8 in the center for as long as you can. Instead, short castles played in the game, and now here Santo Blue, he just goes g4, gaining space on the king side, threatening g5, threatening g takes h5, and so on, and white is gonna get a monstrous attack very, very fast in this game. And what can Magnus do? Well, he starts by taking on g4, h takes, then f takes, and again, now these pawns are just monsters. They're going to march up the board, blow open the king side, maybe go g6, weaken the f7 pawn, weaken the e6 pawn, and so on. White's attack is going to play itself. Therefore here, Magnus, he has to pull something out of his hat, and he goes for the move. Rook takes c3, the rook sacrifice, the exchange sacrifice, giving up the rook for the knight to damage white's pawn structure and maybe win that pawn on e4. Let's see how this goes. We have bishop takes c3. Of course, white can recapture with the bishop. However, you do win the pawn on e4 with knight takes e4. You're threatening knight takes c3. And again, if black did not do this, he would be obliterated on the king side. Therefore, it was the right practical choice by Magnus. All right, now here, Santo Blue, demonstrating his sagacity. He goes rook to h3, the rook lift on the third rank, defending the bishop on c3 with the rook. Now, if you take the bishop, the rook recaptures, and the rook is tremendously placed on the c3 square, slicing down the c-file, defending, and beyond that, white would be ready to advance on the king side. Now here, black, the strongest move is just queen b6, once again getting the queen active, but instead, knight takes c3, chosen in the game by the GOAT. Now we have rook takes c3, and then bishop takes h4, winning that free pawn on the h4 square. However, Santo Blue is not phased. Bishop g2, developing his bishop and trying to trade off the very important bishop on b7. Now we have bishop takes, then queen takes, and then knight d5, jumping in with the knight and pressuring g4 with that knight. All right, now here's Santo Blue, rook h1, pressuring the bishop. Yes, for now it is defended by the queen on d8. However, that bishop may be vulnerable as the game progresses. Now here's Santo Blue, Magnus. He plays a very shocking move, g5. This move cuts off the bishop on this this diagonal, and this bishop is virtually forced to stay on the h4 square. Now, the benefit of this move, you do lock down the h-file. That rook is not getting down to h8 anytime soon. However, this move is very, very committal, and Santo Blue is still in the driver's seat in this game. All right, we have knight f3, dropping back with the knight and threatening knight takes h4. Now, knight g6 defends. Now, if the knight takes, the knight recaptures, and once again, that h-file will be closed. Therefore, rook c6 was chosen in the game by Santo Blue, pressuring d6 and the hanging pawn on a6, very strong. Then we have a5 advancing on the queen side, queen d2 sliding over, pressuring d6, and then queen to f6, sliding out with the queen and pressuring potentially that b2 pawn. All right, now here, Santo Blue, he is done waiting around. He goes knight takes h4, trading on h4 with the knight. And now, very interestingly, Magnus does not recapture with the knight. Instead, g takes h4, chosen in the game, opting to create that passed alpha 0 h-pawn on the h-file, the born-again alpha 0 h-pawn on h4, as it was starting on the g-file, and it is now born again on the h-file in the spear of alpha 0. All right, now rook takes d6, chosen in the game, winning that free pawn, then queen to f3, sliding down with the queen and pressuring that weak pawn on g4. Now we have rook g1, defending the pawn and defending the hanging rook on the h1 square, queen to f4, simply offering that trade of queens is the GOAT. Now we have queen d3, keeping the queens on the board and pressuring b5. Now we have knight d5, jumping in with the knight, pressuring the queen once again. Now we have queen takes b5, winning that free pawn, knight f3, pressuring the rook on the g1 square, rook g d1, slide the rook over to the d file, and now here in this position, it turns out the best move for Magnus, it is not easy to find at all. It turns out you actually want to go king g7. Now, this move does not make a whole lot of sense to me, but it turns out that is the strongest move according to my good friend Stockfish. Instead, in the game, Magnus advancing his born-again alpha 0 pawn to the h3 square, h3 chosen in the game, and while I love this move in spirit, it is not the best way to go here. All right, now, in this position, the best move for white is queen to h5, cutting off that born-again alpha 0 pawn on h3 in its tracks. Instead, queen to e2 chosen in the game, sliding back with that queen, and now the born-again alpha 0 pawn h2, one square away from promoting the long journey, starting with h5, blocking h4, and now the pawn is free all the way on h2. Let's see, Santo Blue stop this pawn. All right, rook 6 d3 chosen in the game, pressuring that knight on f3. Now we have knight d5, dropping back with that knight. Of course, there was a stronger move here. That is the move knight to g1, cutting off the rook's defense of the h1 square. That would be very, very annoying. The right response for white is queen g2, again defending h1, but overall, knight g1 would be a very good move for Magnus. Instead, in the game, knight e5 chosen, and this move, as you can see by the eval bar collapsing or skyrocketing on your left, this move is no bueno. All right, it does pressure the rook. The rook has to move. In the game, rook h3 chosen. Santo Blue staying in complete control so far in this game. Now we have queen takes g4, rook takes h2, queen takes e2, rook takes e2. The queens come flying off the board, as does the born-again alpha 0 h-pawn. Very sad. And now, in the endgame, Santo Blue, he has the extra rook versus the extra knight of Magnus, and that will give him a massive advantage. Now, don't forget, though, here, Santo Blue is down to 37 seconds left on the clock versus the 1 minute and 17 seconds of Magnus. That will give Magnus a decent fighting chance in this endgame. All right, knight g6 chosen by Magnus. Now, rook g1 pins the knight to the king on g8. The audacity. Now we have king g7, rook g5, rook to a8, defending the pawn on a5 immediately. Now, c4, the passed c-pawn begins its march down the board. And here, a4 is the move, locking down that pawn on a3 and giving white a very nasty backwards pawn on the b2 square. All right, king c2 activates the king. King to f6, rook b5, slides the rook over, e5, gains space in the center, and of course that pawn is defended by the knight on g6. Therefore, there is no way for white to trade on e5. All right, c5 is the move. The passed pawn must be pushed. Knight to f4 hits the rook on e2. Then we have rook e3, knight e6, king c3, and here, knight to f4, jumping down with the knight once again. But here, Santo Blue c6. He is not slowing down one bit. That passed pawn must be pushed. All right, rook c8 is the move. Rook c takes e5. Or sorry, rook e takes e5. Then rook takes c6, gives the king the check on c3. We have rook b to c5, blocks the check. Knight e6, rook f5, hits the king, king g6, and now finally, one pair of rooks does come off the board. We have rook takes c6, wins the rook, but gives up the defense of the other rook on f5. Therefore, king takes e5, wins that rook. Now we have rook to a6, pressures the pawn on the a4 square. Now king d4, rook takes a4, hits the king on the e4 square, king to e3, rook to a6, knight c5, rook c6, pressures the knight once again, knight e4, hits the king must move, king c4, and now f5. Now it is an all-out race between the passed pawns on the queen side versus the one passed pawn on the king side. Of course, white should be winning here, but again, white only has 15 seconds left, and that means under time pressure, literally anything can happen, especially when you are playing against the greatest endgame player of all time, that being Magnus Carlsen. All right, rook c7, slides back the rook, f4, king d5, knight f6, hits the king, king e6, knight e4, b4, f3, king d5, f2, rook f7, knight c3, it's the king! And of course, guarding those squares on b5 and a4. Now we have king c6, drops back with the king, knight e2. Now we have a very interesting committal move by Santo Blue. He actually goes for it with rook takes f2, giving up his rook, the counter rook sacrifice. And it turns out this move is perfectly fine for white. If you play correctly, these pawns on the queen side will guarantee a victory. And at the very least, black only has a knight. Therefore, you really can't lose in this position. All right, king takes f2, b5 against the pawns. Knight d4, Magnus fighting back, hits the king. Now king c5, king e3, defends the knight. b6, very good, advancing that pawn. Now knight e6 hits the king, king c6, knight d8, king c7, knight e6, king d7, knight c5, king c6, king d4, and here finally, the king is not under check, and in this position, Santo Blue, he chokes. I don't know how else to say it. He simply chokes right here in this position. Now, if you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to find the key move for Santo Blue right here in this position to win the game, or at least continue, maintaining the advantage. Here, and while you're at it, go and smash that YouTube like button for more videos just like this, featuring the GOAT, Magnus Carlsen. All right, here. The key move for white is you're going to go a4. The point being, if the knight takes the pawn, b7, and that knight cannot stop that pawn on b8, you win the game. And if you don't take on a4, then moves like a5, a6, and so on would win the game, as this king on d4 is just so far cut off from the queenside pawns. Now, instead, in the game, with 2 seconds left on the clock, he actually goes b5, or b7, sorry. And as you can see, by the eval bar collapsing, this move is a catastrophic blunder. Here, Magnus, he gives the knight. Knight takes b7, king takes, king c4, and this pawn on a3 will be lost before it can promote. So, a4, king b4, a5, king takes a5, and here, with literally no material left besides the kings, both sides are forced to agree to a draw on the spot. Wow, what a game between Santo Blue, a guy whose name eludes me, and Magnus Carlsen in this crazy chess.com blitz game from January 21st, 2025. All right, Chess YouTube, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash that like button for me and comment down below what you guys thought of this crazy game, and especially going back here, the rook sacrifice played on move 16, Magnus Carlsen, rook takes c3, giving up the rook to win that pawn on e4 and the knight, setting up crazy complications. This game was insane, and I think we saw why Magnus does not play the Najdorf as black very often, that being the Najdorf with the move 6a6, as this opening is just unbelievably sharp, and there are so many options for white available. Don't make me replay all of those, starting with, bishop g5, bishop b3, f3, g3, h3, and so on. But anyways, crazy game by Magnus. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Comment down below what you thought. And if you want to see more crazy chess games by Magnus, check out this one right here, where I cover maybe the most shocking queen sacrifice in the history of chess. It's from a very famous game played between Magnus and Anish Giri. If you haven't seen that game, that queen sacrifice was straight out of the opening, maybe on move like 7, 8, 9, something like that. Probably the craziest, dumbest queen sacrifice you'll ever see, but he played it anyway. So check that game out, and I'll see you in the next video.